Hello and welcome to the presentations videocast. This time we're going to look at graphs. Now, graphs in presentations are generally a complete nightmare. Among the many things that are nightmares in presentations, graphs do tend to stand out. And I'm interested to look at why this is. And I'm going to present you, I think, with two very revealing examples. The first one is a very slick example from BBC, a video clip about 1.5 minutes long that will show you how to present graphical information really well. But the second clip, which I'm going to do on the screen behind me, is more interesting because I think it shows you that in a live presentation, you can do exactly what we'll see in the first clip very easily yourself and actually do it better because there's a live presentation gives you a richer set of communication tools to enhance that graph. Sounds like a lavish claim, but I'll show you the clip first and I'll prove my point afterwards. So watch this. This is Hans Rosling. I won't say too much about the clip. He can kind of explain the context himself, which is the point I'm making. It's a very, very clear bit of communication. So here's a 1.5 minute clip of Hans Rosling using graphs.
So here we go. First, an axis for health, life expectancy, from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth, income per person, $400, $4,000, and $40,000. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe! And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here.
So what was good about that? Well, quite a few things. I mean, the first thing that you would have noticed is the slickness, the visual slickness of the graph. You had these animations, you had use of color, you had use of the size of the bubbles. The whole thing was transparently overlaid on top of the presenter, so you got this kind of rich communication where the presenter was in the graph. So it was visually very slick. It was cognitively very slick. There was different layers of information. X and Y gave you certain correlations that made sense, but then the colors and also the sizes of the bubbles and so on added extra layers to that information. But I think most importantly, the presenter is a very important part of any presentation, the most important part. There was great enthusiasm and energy. You saw there when the Second or the First World War happened, he dropped as he was sort of describing the drop in the bubbles in this huge dip in population at that time. So he was part of, but also reacting to, almost emotionally reacting to his own material, stressing the key points. But also another thing that was really good about it was the simplicity and the clarity. He said everything slowly, he said everything simply, and he built up the logic in steps so that you got to quite a complicated visual, but did it in very simple steps. Now, here's my point. You can do exactly the same in your own presentations. And in fact, a live presentation for all the bad ones that are given allows you to do this in a more rich and in a more layered and in a more effective way than it allows you to do most communications. Let me show you on the screen behind me to make my point. Okay, let's look at my own example here, and this example is one that you could easily render for yourselves, and I'm going to show you how this example is actually better than the Hans Rosling example that we looked at a minute ago, and also try to convince you that your own similar examples are also better than his ones, and I'll explain why in a second. Usually what people do is they put a pre-existing, pre-formatted complex bramble bush of a graph up, get out the laser pointer and start trying to disentangle what it is, what the hell it is that this thing is supposed to communicate. It doesn't work. More often than not, it causes more confusion. There's a colossal cognitive overload with this. So what you can do, very simply with PowerPoint or something similar, is create the graph in steps. Explain at the start, what's the title of my graph? Then explain that it's a simple XY scatter plot and draw, and explain what the X and the Y actually mean. And maybe you need to show them that this is a logarithmic or a linear scale, or that the 0 position is at a particular place. Lay down the rules of that graph very slowly and very clearly. And then start to draw your points and explain how they came about, and then show the audience all of the points in your data set. And just like Hans Rosling, I'm part of this graph. I can be in the graph. I can point to particular elements. And people often say you shouldn't stand in front of your slides. But like the weather forecaster, I can be part of the graph. And if I'm standing in front of people here, I can move across, or people here, I can move this way, get them into my line of sight to include the audience in a more realistic, more natural way. So what's next on this graph? A trend line. Look at that trend line, just came in there magically just with a simple wipe animation in PowerPoint. Explain why that trend line is curved with that particular double curve element that I've put into it, rather than a straight line, rather than blocking off particular sections and highlighting them, rather than drawing a slope at the start. Why have I made that decision? What does it mean? Tell the audience, look around, get their connection. Maybe I'd link to some pictures or videos. Maybe I want to explain what this means physically. Maybe I want to relate back to a test I've done and show them a picture of the test rig. In this case, it's just 3 modes of transport. Maybe they're sales figures or mileages or whatever. I just put these in randomly, but it's just to show you that you can link your graph back to visual or video elements as well as yourself as the main visual element. Going back to the graph, then you could maybe introduce other graphs. You could show previous results. You could compare to the results from other companies. You could show projections. So the key thing here is that once you've built up the logic in steps and the audience understands what it is that they're seeing and what it means, then visually they can make comparisons at a very, very quick, very high level. We're very good at seeing and interpreting shapes visually. Think of all the faces that you can recognize. Sometimes 20, 30 years having not seen someone, you can still recognize what they look like. So you can notice different patterns with multiple graphs appearing. This one here is higher. This one here is a flick at the end. This one here dips down. So once people understand the graph, they can start using their visual senses to interpret other graphs, and that's very powerful. And as I said, like Hans Rosling, I'm in the graph, I'm part of the graph, I'm part of the experience, and that opens up other possibilities, not least my enthusiasm, my expertise, guiding the audience to the key conclusions I want to make. Now you might look at that and say, yeah, that's not bad, but it's not as good as Hans Rosling's, let's be honest. I would say to you, it's better than Hans Rosling's, and the ones that you give in a similar vein are better than Hans Rosling's, because he's not you. He can't present your stuff to your audience, unless you happen to work in global health. But even then, he doesn't know what you've done in your particular area for that particular audience. So for that reason, you have that particular use to the audience, and that's what gives you your energy, and that's what gives you all of the strength in your presentation. You don't have to be a performer, you have to be clear, effective, and use those visual tools in simple steps. There's another thing that you can do that Hans Rosling can't do or couldn't do. What's that? Well, I've just done it there. I've asked you a question. Now, you're not able to answer that, but if I had a live audience here, I could engage the audience, and that's literally the most powerful part of any presentation, is interaction with the audience. There's another thing I can do, is I can use props, which is another very underutilized and extremely powerful communication tool. A presentation is a three-dimensional live experience, so you can show things, you can do things in the room. In this case, I have a pen and a bottle of water. It's meaningless, but it's just to show you that there is more that you can do with the physical space than you can through the video or through, say, a document or a report. So this, in your own presentations and your own graphs, there's actually no better way than a live presentation to get the most from graphs and graphical for infographics and presenting numbers in graphical form. And it's something to think about. And really it's just about being slow, doing it in steps, being clear, and being interactive with your audience. Hopefully you can take something from that. If you liked it, share it or like it or pass it on. I'll be back before Christmas and I haven't chosen it yet, to pick my presentation of the year. So until then,